All right, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. We've still got some people coming in to attend the webinar that we're doing here today. So what I'm going to do is just do a brief introduction to get us all started, and then we'll go into the brief here. I'm joined as a co-host is by Anthony Pilater. He is the Chief Technology Officer for Horizon 3 AI. Tony, do you have any words to get us kicked off on the right foot?
I do, yeah. Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad to see the room starting to fill up. I set these up. I'm the co-founder and Chief Technology Officer for Horizon 3 AI, and I set these up, these tech talks, webinars, techtorials, whatever we're going to call them, to be this giving back. There's no sales pitches here. We're not selling anything. This is just a knowledge transfer, us giving our insights that we're finding from our experience, things that we're finding in as we go through this journey, and gathering information from you as well, and then sharing that with everybody else. One big announcement that I want to put out, we just released today a proof of concept that Zach developed for us for the CVE 2021-21972, which is for that new vCenter vulnerability that just came out, giving you the ability to take over vCenter through the web UI without actually logging in, which is pretty cool. So take a look at our website. You'll be able to find that POC on there. So yeah, what I like to do is kind of just poke in with things that I know as these guys are talking through everything. But I'm going to get out of the way and let the experts do their thing. I appreciate everybody being here. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Tony. I am Monty Canode. I'm the Chief of Customer and Partner Success at Horizon 3 AI, and we have some great speakers that are going to be here with us today. We've got Travis Falgren, who's been a blue team and red team member. He is a senior engineer, and Zach Hanley, another senior engineer with us who's got a vast amount of red team experience. And what we're going to do today is focus on purple teaming. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started to the brief here. So everybody, welcome to this webinar series and a tech talk on red plus blue equals better. And we're saying that very specifically and deliberately because a lot of times the focus is put on this notion of purple, as in red or a blue is a solution or a purple is a solution. And we're going to focus a lot on the team. And I hope that's what you learned from us here today. So here's the agenda. We want to make sure that we are all together on the value of purple teaming. It's a lot more than just kludging a couple organizations together, but that's what we're going to talk about today. We've got about 45 minutes, and a lot of this stems from the notion of these silos. You've seen these functional and organizational silos that stand up, and as we create a blue team and call it a blue team, or a red team and call it a red team, what we've seen is that when they're not unified and they have differing goals, then the success of the company is put secondary, if even that high up. We're going to go into a little bit of an anatomy of blue and red teams, and you're going to hear from Travis talking about some of his experiences on the success and failures of this teaming effort. And then we're going to bring this to a close here as a team sport, and we're going to have a discussion about how we can help each other. And as always, we're going to end it with our aha moments to ask hackers anything. And this is where you'll get to ask Travis and Zach some very deliberate questions, and Tony. So the last thing I do want to make sure everybody knows is that we will not be opening up any sound or video at your end. You do have access to the question place for you to go ahead and put in questions. And I would definitely encourage that you go ahead and do that. If you don't mind, what I'm going to do as we start off on this, let me close this part out, is set the stage. So what exactly is a blue team? These are typically referred to as defenders. This is a group of people who are assigned a duty to do this defending. And if they are brought together under this notion of team, it could be your security operations center. It could be certain analysts. A lot of times, though, we need to make sure that we're including some of the others, such as IT ops, DevOps. These are your configuration management. But when it comes to a blue team, it's typically viewed as a team that is doing the operations. And conversely, this is what ends up happening with the blue team. This is how they're often viewed out there. And they end up being the ones that they know it's coming. And there's a few problems that go with that. With the red team, these are the attackers. These are the ones who get a very specific task with a very specific goal. And that goal is not what ends up creating some versus, i.e. warfare with the blue team. And so that's why you see a lot of time red versus blue. And that versus problem is what leads to a lot of other problems down the stretch. I want to start this off with talking a little bit about some of the silos that I've seen. I'm a former military and had been in cyber operations. And what I had a great honor of working with some of our nation's best as we came into the 2018 and 2020 elections. And as many of you know, in 9/11, when we were going, we learned a lot from the law enforcement side that they didn't always talk to each other. And what ended up becoming a default and a lot of blame on databases not being synced, what we actually found was that these goals that they had across different law enforcement agencies, whether they were your local county sheriff or the FBI, those goals didn't always align. And so they created differentiation. And now, as we were leading into the elections, if any of you have ever got to work with an intelligence agency or somebody who does this before, their goal is to make sure that they've got an intelligence feed. And so if somebody, such as from cyber or somewhere else, interrupts that feed, that creates pain for them. So, and cyber is trying to stop, the defense side is trying to stop some of these bad guys' insights, while Intel likes to look at those insights so that they can further develop their targeting and understand the adversary better. And that creates a little bit of consternation between the two. What we saw in the 2018 elections as a result of 2016, everybody wondered who's got this responsibility. And then through presidential appointment, they've made very clear that General Nakasone, who was the commander for US Cybercom, had some responsibility. And what was kind of cool was at the beginning, he said, hey, this is what we're going to do. And Intel, law enforcement, and cyber still didn't work together. And then he put them in a headlock and said, hey, guys, this is what we want to do. And what we saw at the cyber side was bringing in defensive ops as well as the offensive stuff and helping each other. And then it's just communicating. You're talking about two different areas that did not talk to each other, but they started communicating. And on the Intel side, starting getting read-ins that, yeah, we have this insight, this is where they're at, this is what they're doing, so that we could actually create operations to the tune of when we brought Intel, offensive, defensive, and law enforcement all together. One of the cool things in 2018 is that we outed some of the Russian efforts in two areas. Some of their malware was released, that we released that on VirusTotal. And that was one of the biggest hits that VirusTotal had to that point, was that we were starting to show this. And let me tell you, if you've ever tried to get Intel to release what they know, it is hard. And so coming together as a team so that you could see an end result that was all about national security, and it wasn't just about sustainment of your own personal agenda, that became powerful. And it was really cool to see as we led up to the 2020s that we had already been working together. And all of a sudden, this notion of going back to what we were doing before was out the window. Everybody wanted to keep working together because we saw this greater goal. And so that's partly what we're going to lean into here, is how this contributed in the past and how we can learn from those lessons. What I'm showing you here right now is an incredible article that was written by Debate Security. We've got the links that are already posted on the white paper, and you can even look at this title and pull it up. Fascinating article, and it's really talking about, is cybersecurity the new market for lemons? And what this identifies is some of the industry trends that we're seeing on the blue side, where they've got a boardroom that absolutely fears disruption. You've got a server room that's fearing a breach, and your resiliency is always in question. And now it's not just of the network and the environment, but people tend to feel this way for your job. And what that's created, as you can see, is fear. And so at that blue side, where you're bringing in new tools to try and alleviate that fear and create policy that alleviates it, when you start seeing different efforts that say, hey, these tools aren't really stopping things, is compliance really doing it? I mean, I'll tell you right now, You can look at SolarWinds and a lot of the people who were using SolarWinds and they were compliant. But what exactly are those tools that we're using that are going to help? And the threat trends, are those tools working against the current threats? And so the current threats, when you're talking about credential attacks that are on the rise, we saw in the last webinar we went through where CrowdStrike had reported that for the first time, malware-less attacks are outpacing and are a more frequently occurring attack than malware use attacks. And so credential attacks are on the rise because they make you look absolutely legit and they're very hard to stop. As I just brought up with SolarWinds, we're seeing more pervasive supply chain attacks. And now what we've got is you can see the bad guys have got a template for how to do this and how to become more pervasive in their attack. And ransomware attacks to the tune of NotPetya cost people globally about $10 billion. And when we start looking at cybercrime, down at the bottom there, that number, there's another article that references it, and you can click on that as well in the links, $10.5 trillion. And so now you can see why drug lords and transnational criminals, as well as nation states, North Korea for one, and the Lazarus Group is notorious for using cyberspace capabilities to raise money for their own country. And now when we're talking about cybercrime now becoming this big, it garners attention. And not just of the bad guys, but now our boards are starting to look at it and say, hey, maybe the attackers know something that we don't. Why are they so successful? Maybe we need a new perspective. And so that's why they're starting to look at incorporating a red team into their actions. And so the industry trends start off, they're showing that more people are using pen testing teams, but still about less than 8% are using red teams in-house. And I just want to differentiate for the group out there. There's a difference between pen testing and red teams. Pen testing is trying to get in, and there's internal pen testing and external pen testing, but that's what it's trying to do, is show that breach action to show where you're vulnerable, while a red team is typically associated with an exercise. And that's why when you have a blue team and a red team, you'll typically have an exercise that goes on. And I'm gonna let Travis talk a little bit more about that when he gets up there, about some of the good and bad that goes with that. The one thing that really stood out though from the data that we pulled from a lot of different write-ups was that less than 1% of these groups execute pen tests or red teams more often than once a month. And what that does is it creates stagnation. And part of this is there's a problem, as I said, we got a versus problem with blue versus red, because both sides want to demonstrate their competence and skill. But the difference is in their goals. And so when we talk about a blue team, any of you who have been out on a blue team, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick out a poll here real quick, so that we can get a little bit of feedback from you going forward. This is about blue teams. And if any of you have been on a blue team or your company employs a blue team, go ahead and chime on in. All the results are anonymous. You don't have to worry about what we're pulling here. We'll make sure to share with you some of the results at the end on what we found. And we'll make sure that you get all that insight here. So I'm gonna let that go ahead and go for a minute. But during this time, the blue team, they own that enterprise. They're the ones who are in it all the time. They're always on. But while they own it, red, their job to show competence and skill is to pwn it. Because if they go in and they're hired to come in, but they don't actually succeed, what their version of success is pwning you. They want to get domain controller access and create new accounts. They want to be able to do that breaching action at your perimeter. And what it often does is it becomes an embarrassment of one trying to embarrass the other one to show that they were better, instead of, hey, how can our company learn from each other with these different perspectives? Because blue is there, they are monitoring, and that means the endpoints, and there is a lot to monitor, as you all well know. And I'm going to go ahead and shut off the polling here. We had some pretty good responses. But when it comes to the red team side of the house, they are maneuvering. That is what they're focused on. Where the blue is monitoring those endpoints, they're maneuvering because blue is looking at those specific ends while red is doing lateral movement And they know that's what blue's looking at, because blue's focused on that perimeter and endpoints while red is doing paths and vector. And so what we end up happening is a blue wants to crush the red and red wants to crush the blue. And so how does a company turn the map around so that they can start incorporating both perspectives here? And what we have seen is a number of companies are making this pivot over to purple. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Travis so that he can give you a few of his perspectives as a blue team operator and as somebody who's done cyber defense for a while on what he's seen out there. I'll turn it over to you, Travis.
Thanks, Monty. Hey, everybody. Just a little background, as Monty had said. I spent 20 years in the military, and then doing some environments that would be offensive as well as defensive parts of the cyber. So I got a little bit of a perspective on both of them there. So from the blue side, when I started working there, we would bring in, as we've talked about already, some either red teams or external pen testers, and do different types of operations and things like that to begin with. And some of the bad that we experienced from this at the very beginning was when you bring in these external parties and their one job is just to penetrate the network and attack the network, and they're not closely ingrained with the blue guys or anything like that. Testing was often done in what I would call a communication void, right? Like us the blue team, we didn't really know what was going on. You weren't privy to any of the information. You didn't know half the time or most of the time that the exercise was coming or any of that. And as I say, they're a bad experience for blue. That's often what happens, because the guys in the blue side, your job is to protect the network, right? So any of you have ever had an assessment that it's almost expected that red's going to get in. Like in all my experiences, red has eventually found a way to get into the network, and then the blue guys end up looking bad. And what this creates, or at least created in my experience with a lot of the guys that I worked with, and especially my junior guys, is it would create kind of a tunnel vision, right? So red gets in, whatever methodology that they used, the guys on the blue team a lot of times would focus onto that area, right? And what this would kind of do is it would kind of leave the rest of the network, even though red's going to be looking around other places and doing things, it would kind of leave them open, and not a lot looking there, even if stuff was going on. And that tunnel vision of, I got to catch these guys, so that we look like we're doing what we're supposed to do and we're doing our job, it can be really, really pervasive, and it doesn't really help the overall security posture of the network. And then remediation can take a while. Anybody who's done this before, we had engagements that would often take 4 weeks, maybe 2 months sometimes, different depending on who we were working with and what was going on. And they weren't generally feeding us information during the course of the operation. So all of this would wait until the very end, and then you would get a report, right? And sometimes the things would get fixed. It depended on what was found, but operation in life doesn't stop just because we got this report. So things could get lost in the mix that happened way back when, and so it doesn't advance the security posture of the network as much as it could or should. And as I say there, teamwork makes the dream work, right? So we decided there's got to be a better way to do this. So what we started doing is, kind of with some of our in-house red team guys, we would do, if you look at that graphic in the upper right hand, it's kind of a circular view there, planning together, right? So we would bring the guys together from the blue team and the red team, and we would kind of plan out the operation of what was going to go on, whether it was we were going to emulate a specific APT, advanced persistent threat, or just a particular methodology or something like that, or of that nature. But planning it together, we could focus on certain areas, and where we could do many of these types of things. Like we could do it over the course of, 1 week we do this operation, and then 1 week we would do this. And the key there, especially, listen to everything Monty said before now, if you were kind of looking at that, is the communication aspect of it, right? Everybody talking together, everybody works together and is in the loop, right? So there's no stump the dummy, there's no crush the red guy, crush the blue guy. Everybody's working towards the common good, and they're working together and talking to each other to do this. They're doing it throughout the engagement, and everybody's able to learn. So one of the things that really helped a lot of the guys that were on some of my blue teams is when we're doing this, they may not be super familiar with exactly what the attackers are doing and how they're doing things. So by doing this, they can kind of pick up those methodologies and see how the red team actually attacks, see how attackers will work. And that helps them as they're looking for things in the network and as they're going about their job, whether they be the threat hunters or they're the CSIRT guys, incident responders, or anything like that. And just because you're on the red team doesn't mean you know how defense works either, right? So I think it helped a lot of our red teamers, you know, it got them kind of in there. They're seeing our monitoring systems and the way we have alerts set up and what we're looking for. And sitting side by side through some of this, they're able to actually see how it works, and they can give input, be like, hey, you might want to adjust it to do these type of things and things like that. And what we would do is you could set time frames where you'd have like 2 weeks, right, where we're doing this operation, where we'd go through this whole cycle, and then we're done. We debrief, we talk about what worked, what didn't, and then we could go through another cycle as time allowed and as our tempo would allow. So. And one great thing about this, and probably in my opinion, as the guy who's working to defend the network that was best, is the reactions are fluid and fixes are fast. How I say that, like if they get in, because we're sitting next to each other and working together, they get in through a certain method or they use a certain TTP to bypass our security measures, we're sitting together and we can institute fixes right away, right? So they're not forgotten over the course of an operation or the course of a test. And we're not waiting till the end when this whole compiled report is given to us of everything. We're fixing them and we're addressing them as we go on. And then we move on to the next best thing and the next best thing and the next thing, And then just to reiterate, I've said it multiple times, the communication, just being able to talk to each other. So, I mean, you can call it purple teaming all you want. We can call it whatever we want. But what it is working as a team together, to achieve the common goal that we should all be doing anyway. So it doesn't really matter what you want to call it, but it's that communication and that teamwork, and being one cohesive group. I think that really helps. And those are some of my experiences on it. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Travis. And Josh Levine has a question for you that I think is okay for us to go ahead and ask and answer right now, where he asked, have you been a part of any engagements where the red team gave tips to the blue team on where they were attacking so the blue team could help guide the SOC into tuning alerts or systems for detection and remediation?
I have, and that was kind of what the good part when I get down here to the bottom part, some of our later engagements where we were able to institute this planning the actual operations together and the communication throughout the process of what they were actually doing so that we could go through and clean things up. Like the latter part of my time as a blue team, one of our major goals was cleaning up a lot of the white noise in the network and stuff like that and finding what really mattered and having the red guys there to help us do that and actually pointing out the things so that we could get the right pieces in place was really, really beneficial.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Travis. We'll come back to you here near the end here. So everybody knows I'm going to launch a second poll that's focused on red teaming. You're going to see that pop on your screen here. And while we queue on that, I'm going to give that just a second to go. Part of my experience with the red teaming was it was not very positive. It was incredibly frustrating, the lack of detail that they would give back to us on how they got in, on what they did. All we got was a report at the end, and it created a real hostile work environment that became very toxic, to the point that in the future, anytime a notion of a red team participating with us, or when we had to undergo some compliance evaluation, it was not a positive experience for anybody involved. And Red would complain and call us out for cheating, and we would call them out for cheating. And you start going, cheating? I mean, what exactly are we cheating at here? What is our goal that we're trying to do? If the goal is expose the other team as a fraud, then yes, there you're gonna have that individual team in success. But if the goal is making our company's cybersecurity stronger or our national security more resilient, that was not what we had seen. And so That's why this notion of purple teaming is so very powerful. I can tell you right now among many companies and especially in the military. And this is why we also call it a purple pivot. And a lot of this purple pivot, you can see on the Venn diagram where there's the overlapping. And what it's really trying to do is unify. And I think part of the problem is, and with this rules dichotomy, this was an interesting, I had somebody ask me a question on LinkedIn. And as I tried to explain this dichotomy, because he brought up the idea that he felt like it was a bad position Blue was put in because they have to follow all these rules and attackers don't. And so when I start looking at this like a dichotomy, instead of all those, let's look at the rules. So when a CIO or CISO creates compliance or policy, or somebody in your security side, configuration management, IT ops, DevOps, whatever the case may be, even DevSecOps, which is now gaining traction, you create this rule to mitigate risk. But if I think part of the dichotomy where users and defenders have rules and attackers don't, what you really got to realize is attackers are just trying to obviate that rule at minimum risk. And so if an attacker can get around your rule, if you put so much effort into creating this rule or creating this kind of barrier that is going to be out there, but if it's minimum risk, because if it's too risky or too much of a pain, they're going to move on. They're human, they're going to move on. But a defender, if you're going to look at this thing and what you've put into creating this rule, and it's a compliant, whether it's a compliance requirement or whether it's something that you're just very passionate about, and we've all got our sacred cows, man, maybe you need to rethink that risk and rule, because if the risk to get around it isn't that much and it doesn't cost much, is there much value in that rule? And so that's the power of purple. And what that brings to you is starting to relook at that risk and your rules and how effective and efficient both are. And I would tell you that that rules dichotomy can absolutely be flipped to include a tools dichotomy. That same exact thing, that you have this tool intention that you create and you employ to mitigate risk. But part of the belief is users and defenders have tools and attackers don't. Attackers aren't just hacking by hand. They do a little bit of that, but there are tons of tools out there in offensive security that are being used. And the attacker, they know that if you've got a certain defensive tool that you're using, they're going to try to get around that tool at minimum risk, whether it's a password policy or some kind of multi-factor authentication, and they're going to use a lower level protocol. They are going to try to get around your tool, your firewall, your endpoint detection and response, whatever that case may be, at minimum risk. And so if they're able to do that, then maybe you got to rethink that risk in that tool, because then the value it's providing is not really there. And that's part of what that previous article was at. How are you assessing that risk and rule, let alone tool that you've put so much faith and trust in? And so with the power of purple, you then start re-looking at these from a different perspective, because if you're only on one side, you're never going to rethink that risk in the terms of how red is coming at you. And so it changes your approach and gets new tactics. And just, I think it was really cool what Travis said too. A lot of red teamers don't always look at the blue side going, exactly how are they stopping me? And they get better at what they're doing. And so what you have is this mutual growth. And that is an absolutely powerful concept inside a company. Before we move on from this, I want to make sure that I issue out a quick beware here, okay? Oftentimes, what people look at when they talk about purple is that they are focused very, very much on purple and exercises, usually called purple team exercises. And so what we end up having here is people think that, okay, I got to have a blue team and a red team, and then I create a purple team. And what they do is they forget about the guys in IT ops who are implementing a lot of these rule sets and managing the network and the environment that's out there. And if you focus, just like Travis said, on the exercises, man, you get tunnel vision. It's almost like, hey guys, we got the red team coming in, or we're going to be this other, we're going to do this exercise. So we're going to gear up, then stop what you're doing to do this, and then go back to what you're doing. And that's part of the pain, is that if you're only doing these things once every so often, then it truly is an exercise that you're gearing up for, and then you shut down, and learning from that and making it a positive part of your regular daily environment gets a little bit tough. You really got to focus on team. The notion of exercises is good and purple is good, but if those are your metric that matters and you forget about the team you're bringing together with unified goal, you're going to end up not coming out with the results that you want. At least that's what we've seen. So here's how we go forward. And these are some of the things we're thinking, because this is what we've seen at our end. We're in this together. Okay. And so by doing so, one of the first things we have got to do is eliminate competition. And by that, I mean within your company, because dividing and conquering, that's what an adversary does. If you do that in-house, you are going to create, it's not going to be fun. And they might just smoke and joke about it afterwards. And hey, we got you. Hey, we got you. But how is the company getting better? Unless they can truly partner up, you're going to have that competition, and it's going to ruffle some feathers. As well, like we've already said, you got to incorporate your IT ops and your DevOps teams, because they are pushing software code. They are implementing different capabilities out there, and they're the ones that are managing a lot of that 24/7. What might just look like an outage could actually be a security incident. And so bringing them in up front lets you bake them into the process, much like some of the tools and capabilities we got, instead of bolting them on afterwards. Unifying your team's goals and success and making that clear, both red and blue, so that you have a true purple team, and that you say, here's the goal and success. And you make that learning from each other part of your goal and success. And you create this, instead of a bunch of know-it-alls on both sides, but learn-it-alls in the center, you're going to come out much better. Those are the main three things. And then you got to rinse, lather, repeat. If you only do this once a year, expect that what you're going to have is a risk profile that changes, because what you're going to see is, as you go on through time, that risk goes up, 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 and then you learn some and you bring the risk go down. And then it just goes up, 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 and then you learn some and it goes down. You've got to rinse, lather, repeat, and make this continuous. And yes, there's some work involved in that, but much like we found with the elections, man, once you start doing this and you see how much you're learning and how much better you are, both sides can't imagine going back. And so that's how we are going to finish off here today, is with the question that you've got to ask. If you're a CIO or CISO, if you're in a SOC, if you're on a red team and you're being brought in to evaluate and participate in this stuff, to even start asking about becoming more purple at that end, are we unifying and driving our people and partners towards a painless and powerful cybersecurity posture? Okay. And then you got to verify that answer. If you just answer yes, you might want to make sure that you can verify that you've got the same goals, that you're on the same page, because the answers you get back are going to be pretty darn important from the people who are actually on the teams. Okay, so that's the main part of the webinar. We're now going to break off into our aha moments here. Tony, I wanted to make sure to bring you in. Now that we have finished off with some of this learning, you've had a lot of experience on both red and blue side. So if you don't mind, I wanted to make sure to ask if you had anything you wanted to close this out with, while I bring up a few questions that have been teed up for Zach and Travis.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Bonnie. So a couple of things that I wanted to add was, one, I love the idea. I do not love the idea of a purple team. I don't like calling it that. That's just a naming thing that just bugs me. That's the whole intent, is to have a purple culture, right? Pivot to purple as a culture, vice one team versus another team, or a brand new team. So that's one thing that I wanted to make sure that I said, which is my opinion on it. The other thing was, I love the slide, and I love the idea of, you can see how your risk and your security debt is accruing over time when you don't do these things on a more repeatable basis. You're more of a waterfall approach to cybersecurity and improving your cybersecurity posture than you are an agile approach to it. And he's putting some questions in there. And when you talk about DevSecOps and bringing in the IT ops folks into this, and the configuration and change management folks into it, then now you're looking at it from a holistic standpoint, vice just the infrastructure, vice just tuning my tools. It's a whole holistic look at the security posture. And that's where the purple culture really comes in much better. Instead of me trying to attack in an environment and show that I was able to get in, where I won't have value to you if I don't find some way to get in. That's not the way you want to look at it. We need to look at it as, okay, I was not able to get in. Here are the things that I tried, and here are the places where the defenses held up. And here are places where defenses did not hold up in the whole tuning process, but doing it on a more agile, more sprint type cadence and doing it on a more repeatable basis. That's what I really like about the purple culture and how teams can come together to make that faster and that feedback loop better. So yeah, thanks.
And I'm going to tell you, Tony, I really like that you called it a purple culture, because that's really what you're creating is beyond just a team, but a culture that's embodying exactly what we talk about here. We got a question that I'm going to ask both Zach and Travis. I think it's going to be relevant to you both, because what are some of the challenges you've seen specific to DMZ security? So when we talk about the perimeter and such, so Travis, if you don't mind going first as somebody who's seen it as a defensive side, and then Zach, from a red side with DMZ security, some of the challenges, not just at attacks, but maybe in coordination with the other side to resolve some of the problems you've seen. Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing that I can think of in the past when looking at DMZ and things like that is just too many things out there. A lot of times, and not having an accurate always representation or view of what is in the DMZ. Because everything's out there, obviously, by nature of the reason why you're putting it there needs to be accessible for external resources usually. So trying to have a plan in place to review the resources that are out there and being able to accurately track those and keep a good view on them so that we could limit the amount of things that are out there, and the things that we do have to have out there having like very verbose logging capabilities and monitoring capabilities on them so that we had a good picture of what's going on there. So yeah, hope that answers the question.
Yeah, go ahead, Zach, and your perspective on some of the things you've been able to exploit and what you've seen on the DMZ security side.
Yeah, so I think one of the hardest parts about it, and specifically securing a DMZ, would be you're always going to be playing catch up. Like this last year, we've had a lot of very critical vulnerabilities that have come out that affect things that are typically exposed externally or in a DMZ, like VPNs, you got Oracle WebLogic. And so when these vulnerabilities come out and they're weaponized the very same day or the next day, a lot of times these companies are just not quick enough to patch. So what you need to do is really focus in on having great detection built into the DMZ. So every host that's in the DMZ needs to have really good detection, and how you build that great detection is you have to bring in purple teams or red teams, and they have to work with your blue teams so that you build out all these different detection methods for all these different TTPs, so that if you detect that one of your hosts in your DMZ is now communicating with a server it never has before, that you can immediately detect that and start locking that server down. So really building in detection on the DMZ is probably the best way to go about it, I'd say.
All right, good feedback, Zach. Thank you very much. We've got another question. Let me make sure that I can read this exactly right. From a blue and purple perspective, what measures and practices have you seen to help the data and system owners understand the operational impact due to threat actor actions? So Zach, what have you seen, or how have you advised people to tune some of those capabilities to be better? There are mitigations that you can have, but when you're seeing what measures, like you just talked about, improving that detection at that endpoint, are there any specific things that you've seen that you've advised that have been implemented and been pretty productive on the blue side?
Yeah, sure. So typically when you have some critical vulnerabilities out there, you're able to gain remote code execution or exfiltrate files. So one of the classic signs that you've been exploited and you got RCE on a host is that a new process is spawned. So building in detection for when certain new processes like cmd.exe are spawned when the host normally never does that out of a certain parent process, or PowerShell is spawned. So really classic generic detection for RCE can be put in place on hosts, as well as there's also network detection. So like I said before, when a server is communicating with another server in your organization that it never has before, just building in network type rules. So the thing about this is a lot of people don't really know what kind of detection they have in place in their organization. So you have to, I've seen it take 3 or 4 iterations of exploiting a vulnerability and communicating with their SOC and their blue team and their IT team, to everybody coming together, making sure they can see the timestamps as when the exploit happened, so that they can see what the processes and process tree looked like and all the logs, so that they can really build in the detection. So basically it takes a few iterations of that so that they can really fine tune those alerts.
Hey, Zach, I think one of the cool aspects of this, and when we talk about our one of our customers who's a big manufacturing company, where he's called you up and said, hey, Zach, I just fixed the Java JMX with a GPO push. Can you go ahead and see if you can attack it? And we create that real time, just like Tony alluded to, agile security, where he's comfortable having you attack his stuff because he wants to know, is it still vulnerable? And that's been good feedback for us and them, don't you think?
Yeah, of course, being able to see into the blue team and SOC side of what they're detecting and not helps a red team develop their TTPs better.
Absolutely. Hey, Tony, I think this next question, you're going to be very well suited to answer this. This is from Dexter Bacon. How does the strategy of secure host baselines change with the SolarWinds happening? Do we hash and hope for the best, or implement secure baselines, new guidelines? As you know, zero trust is all the rage amongst a lot of companies right now. Been out for almost a decade, but how do you think the strategy of a secure host baseline changes now?
I'll tell you right now that attacking a host directly is getting extremely difficult. And I think Zach can attest, Zach and Travis can attest to this as well. EDRs and the endpoint detection, endpoint protection, they're getting really good. It's less about attacking those specific endpoints and more about finding ways to chain other things together, credentials that we're finding, security misconfigurations that are able to be found. Zach, can you kind of back me up on that?
Yeah, I think there's been a whole lot of focus on endpoint security in the last decade. And even though there's been really well-published articles and write-ups in the security community about attacking domains and organizations as a whole, I think attacks like involving chaining different Active Directory weaknesses, they're not necessarily vulnerabilities, they're just misconfigurations that they're widely overlooked a lot of times. So when a hacker needs to spend a month figuring out a TTP to evade antivirus to get a domain admin versus just abusing a simple domain misconfiguration to get a domain administrator, they're just going to go for the easy stuff.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to really efficiently understanding how to improve your security posture. So instead of like looking for better ways to improve endpoint detection and endpoint protection, because those things are there, we find, okay, there's some new vulnerabilities out there. Let me put more endpoint protection out there and do more of that and focus on that, instead of shifting things to the left of bang and trying to find ways of better implementing security policy and having policy as code and finding more efficient ways to improve security posture, vice just focusing on endpoint protection or better SIEM and better logging, what is the most efficient path to get to there? It may be, I don't have to do as much logging over in this section of things because that doesn't really do anything to, to move an attack forward. These things over here do, so I should need to focus on this side of it. And the more you work in a purple culture with red and blue working together towards the same goals and having very efficient communication, they can start to build these TTPs together to look at the right things, vice just focusing on endpoint protection because endpoints are all over the place. Good question.
How about you, Travis?
I lost my button there. I actually, real quick, Monty, if you didn't mind, I wanted to double tap on the question that Zach had answered a minute ago from John Kelly about the blue and purple perspective. Because I think Zach's answers were great from a technical perspective, but one of the things he has there is with the system owners understanding the operational impact of it and getting, he mentions in there, a lot of times we keep the questions in the 6 or the IT section, right? And you had brought up earlier about the kind of bringing in the IT ops and all the other sections and all those areas. And a lot of times we keep them, they're left out. And I think that hits directly on what John was asking in there. And what we tried to do, and it wasn't always successful, and sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't, is we tried to kind of garner champions within all the other sections, so to speak, right? Because everyone wants to do a good job and everyone wants to be part of the team, hopefully. And by bringing in these guys that are these systems owners, when we're doing these red team, blue team, purple team operations, at least so that they're aware of what's going on with their systems, and not, because they, just like blue doesn't like being crushed, these guys don't like their systems being messed with, and they're not really, when they're not in control of it, right? Because everybody always blames cyber when something goes wrong, because we know that. Like if something goes wrong, cyber did it, it's their fault, antivirus or McAfee's fault or whoever, you can pick your vendor, pick your poison there. It's always gonna be their fault. So what we tried to do was kind of bring some of those partners in from the different sections so that they were kind of privy to what the 6 is doing or the IT sections are doing. And we also tried to, for the education piece, to what affects the mission on the company, right? So when you have these pieces and you do the reports, or we would do like a monthly kind of like town hall session if we could with somebody from all the different organizations and stuff like that, so that they could be aware of what was going on, so we could kind of keep them in the loop and educate them and hear their concerns on it and all those type of things, and actually show them when we were doing these, what these breaches could lead to and what they were, if that makes sense.
That does. I think that's valuable, Travis, and I'm glad you got to go back and answer that. I'm going to go back to the SolarWinds question just because it was with my perspective on it. When we talk about a secure host baseline, 2 things on this. Number one, was in another conversation where a CIO for a large medical company said, "Hey, what do you guys say about SolarWinds? I'm not buying them anymore. I'm getting rid of them." My comment back to that wonderful man was, look, that's great and all if you want to, just like you heard from Travis, we're all going to blame somebody for it. But when we talk about a vendor tool, what was the practice for that supply chain attack? You're talking about persistent and pervasive credentialed access with SolarWinds. So when you start talking about a host baseline and everything, I want to, so if you just bring in a new tool that still gives credentials all over the place, that crosses all over your domains, you're still going to be open to some of those same problems unless you implement a little bit more of the right policy at the right place. But when you talk about host baselines, let's just talk about the SolarWinds side for a second here. You're talking about 300,000 plus customers, and only 18,000 had downloaded the patch update. Of those, there were about 200 plus that were identified as being targeted and attacked. So small, but let's go back to the 18,000. Everybody goes, "Oh my goodness, that's so much." Almost 94% of customers hadn't downloaded the patches that had been out for 9 months. So maybe there's another story that as an attacker, I'm looking at this going, oh, they're like what? Most people using SolarWinds are about 8 versions behind and aren't even using it. That brings up a whole other host of vulnerabilities. So when you start talking about a secure host baseline, how does that change? I think some people reverted to, I'm going to have to not download the patches and the updates because now that's going to make me vulnerable. But they forget about all the what the patch and the update was supposed to do to fix and make you non-vulnerable. And I think that's something that Zach and Travis and Tony can all attest to. A lot of the things that we're finding, we're having to tell them, hey guys, you can fix this if you just go through and run the patch and make sure that you remove this off there. When we start talking about a secure host baseline, that's one of the bigger problems, is getting that into your DevOps cycle so that you can make sure that your infrastructure and that specific application are going to be able to function as you want. But you've got to be fast and responsive. Zach just talked a little bit about how a certain vulnerability would come out, and people were on it so quick that they're already developing an exploit for it. I think what we've got to do is we've got to recognize just how much faster we've got to be at kicking code out and making sure that we can implement patch actions. And it's a risk discussion. That speed has got to be a risk discussion between CIO, CISO, your SOC. You've got to have some really good conversations. And the best way to get the answers you want is have somebody from Red there to advise you, to have them in to show, yes, I could use this right now. And create that purple team environment that goes from the boardroom to the server room so that they can start to understand that impact by the risk they're doing by their action or inaction. That notion of purple teaming definitely can make that faster, and I think a lot more relevant. So we'll bring that home. We did have a couple of, go ahead, Tony.
I do want to add something else there. I could talk about this stuff all day. I think IT ops got it right a long time ago when they went with the notion of site reliability engineering, and 100% uptime is impossible. You can't do it. They have the notion of service level objectives and service level indicators and error budgets, and that error budget is the time at which the allotted time that you are granted every increment of how much downtime you can have, right? Chaos engineering. Netflix has it. AWS just put in, I can't remember what their thing is called, but it's this idea that we don't have enough people. There's too much variability, and things are going to go down. To say that in the cyber world, from a defensive standpoint, is like, oh, we don't say that. We don't say that. Because it's always, oh, we have to be right 100% of the time, and the bad guy's got to be right one time. We are always fighting an uphill battle, and we'll never win it. So if we think about it more from along the same lines of site reliability engineering on the IT ops side, is I need to make today better than it was yesterday. I need to become faster at identifying and have better metrics and understanding what's going on in my environment. And I need to isolate these problem domains. And from a security standpoint, it's more about how do I lower the blast radius from these problems? How do I isolate those problem domains so that if something does happen here, how do I stop it from proliferating out into these other, whatever the word is, out of this into these other areas of my environment? So that's through moving towards zero trust. That's through moving target defense, and starting with the fundamentals of good cyber hygiene, good configuration management, and configuring things securely, and validating all of that on a regular basis. I could talk about that all day. So somebody throw something at me, so I stop.
So I think we're coming to the end. Dexter, you asked the point about supply chain and how we combat that. Much like we said, purple isn't the right key. I think you got to talk to your suppliers. You've got to talk to, I know that's one thing. When I was at a U.S. Transportation Command, and we tried making everybody from the mom and pops to the Boeings to the Maersk and everybody encrypting our manifests, they wanted to know what the requirement was. And well, that's going to cost $1 million for us to start encrypting and decrypting. So I think you got to understand who your customer is. And if they're taking care of your data, that's another version of teaming, is coming together to understand, okay, what exactly is our risk profile on here? And I got to tell you, I'm going to close this whole thing out with Tony. Thank you, Travis. Thank you. And Zach, you brought it home there. We had a question about Mimikatz and if it's still being used, if it's even still valuable by Michael, and you gave a great answer as well as the reference. And that's the value of this purple teaming and being able to ask a question and answer. And that, because sometimes we presume something and Zach gave you all that and you go, wow, I haven't heard that before. That's that value that you can have by bringing those couple diverse perspectives together so that you can learn something new and be a little bit stronger at the end of the day. On that note, Travis, Zach, do either of you have anything you want to leave them with?
Nope, thank you very much.
All right, good deal. Tony, and thanks to you too. Tony, I'll turn it over to you to close us out.
I appreciate it, Monty. Thanks everybody for joining. This was a really good second run at these webinars, tutorial things that we're putting together. I have a lot of fun with these. I know the team likes putting these together and running with these. And we're going to keep doing them more and more and more. So send us what you want to hear about. Send us your feedback, and I'm excited to hear it. And we'll look for you at the next one. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. We'll be following up with a note with a little bit of a survey at the end, as well as the results from the polling for you all. Thank you very much for joining us for this live webinar. And if you have any questions or comments about anything that we did here, I encourage you to email us out, and we'll make sure that we're responding to you pretty darn quickly. Customer success at horizon3.ai. Thank you very much, y'all, and have a great day.